Okay, so by the time the Cathedral of the Immaculate Conception laid its cornerstone up in 1882 up in Quality Hill, Kansas City by that point was a city on the make, right? It was a city that people recognized. The railroad arriving in 1870 kind of made Kansas City, or really started Kansas City. And so along with sort of the growth of an urban area, you not only have churches, but then you also have the arrival of sort of the other classic urban institutions, which are red light districts, right? And so the story that I want to tell here starts actually not in sort of Kansas City, but in Lexington, Kentucky. As in Lexington, Kentucky in 1842, a young woman by the name of Leanna Chambers was born, was raised in Lexington. Her dad was a Confederate sympathizer, and in 1860 she was thrown out of her house when she declared her support for Abraham Lincoln, that she was an anti-slavery advocate. Her dad and her family was pro-slavery, and she was literally kicked out of the house over this issue. She winds her way, finds herself in Indianapolis, Indiana, where because she's been kicked out, has no real skills, she ends up working in prostitution in the city. And while she's sort of working there in the 1860s in prostitution, her house gets raided, she gets caught, her name is written down in the books, and so she can no longer work in Indianapolis, right? She's been caught, she's been named, she's been outed, and the cops would always recognize her if she was found around Indianapolis again. So by having learned a trade, she packs up and moves to Kansas City, where she then opens her own brothel at 4th and Wyandotte, where, what's that? Oh, sorry. I'm good, I got something. Thanks, Steph. So she moves to what was then sort of one of the most thriving red light districts west of the Mississippi in sort of, I don't know what the neighborhood's called now. It's now River Market. I don't know what it would have been called then.
River.
What's that?
Was it River Key back then?
Was it? Yeah. House is at 4th and Wyandotte, down where the city market is now. And she opened, for the first year she moved to Kansas City in 1870, she just rented out a back room and basically kind of sold her own services, if you know what I mean. Within a year, she was so savvy and so successful, she bought a 25-room mansion and turned it into one of the most opulent whorehouses, basically, in Kansas City. I actually have a picture I'll pass around once I'm done, but it had tile floors that she had spelt her name in. It said, all the glasswork said AC. She went by Annie Chambers. She changed her name after she left Indianapolis. And opens again, so this is sort of, by that point, Kansas City had about 100 saloons, about 50 open brothels that were sort of recognized by the city. Her brothel was sort of 2 doors down from the police department, and she paid all kinds of bribes to keep it open, as well as offering sort of coupons and services there, and she ran it successfully up until, she founds it in 1870 and runs it until about 1923, until that sort of full time, like open business for her, until a minister by the name of David Buckley moves next door. Literally takes up shop next door. And again, so we think about religious history and urban institution being cathedrals and being churches, but David Buckley moved to the red light district of Kansas City for particular purposes. He moved into the house next door, hoping to sort of turn one of these brothels into a church. Like, that was his vision, to sort of remake the red light district into a religious institution by turning a brothel over into a church in some ways. These were called sort of rescue missions, so he was motivated partly by his concern for the homeless and what he saw as sort of rampant alcoholism in the red light districts, also sort of women who were forced by various means to be in prostitution. So he was partly sort of concerned for the social reform efforts, but then also just driven by his fear of the sin of the city, right? To try to save, now cities were becoming these immoral spaces in which vice and crime and immigrants and immorality was sort of growing unchecked. And so he wanted to found something. And so in 1923, he moves next door to Annie Chambers. And Annie Chambers, of course, can't stand him because he stands on the streets and preaches and tries to shame the men going into her brothel and shame the women coming out of his brothel, saying, you're somebody's daughter, do you know what you're doing? You're living a life of sin. But at one point, one of the women that was working for Chambers had a child, and the child died unexpectedly in infancy. And so Chambers goes over to Buckley and says, look, I don't like you, I can't stand you, but we had a child that died, and I was hoping you could run services. Buckley is sort of moved by this, obviously recognizing that these women have lives in addition to just being sort of objects and objects of sin. So he holds a service for the child and basically ends up striking up with a friendship with all these women in the house, strikes up a friendship with Annie Chambers. By 1923, Annie herself converts to Christianity and wills her brothel to David Buckley, who then founds the City Union Mission out of this brothel. It's obviously, this isn't it. But they sold the house to it, and it ran from 1923 until the Great Depression, when the WPA came in and built City Market and leveled that whole area. So that with the money they sold, selling that brothel, selling the mansion, they bought this institution, which by that point, the center of homelessness in Kansas City had sort of moved to this region and sort of opened up this. And so now it's it's the largest sort of shelters in the city. It's open 365 days a year. And so that's part of their religious mission is part of sort of social outreach, right? That sort of it's not just sort of about saving people sort of spiritually, but it's also trying to meet their material needs, partly in recognition that no one's going to hear their message until they help them in some way. So it's a little bit of a bait and switch, but it's also sort of a part of their intentional mission. As for Annie Chambers, she died in 1935, at which point was when the house was leveled. And so the house is now gone, or the mansion is now gone, but you can actually still find a couple of remnants of Annie Chambers' sort of brothel. In the National Archives over by Union Station, does everybody know where I'm at with the National Archives headquarters there? They donated the mirror that was in the parlor. So as you enter the National Archives, which I've always thought was really weird, like here's the center of federal higher, where all the documents of the region are kept by the federal government. Here's a big mirror from a whorehouse, just sort of like right in the middle of the reading room, so you can go see it there. And then in the Kansas City Museum, there's a spider on me. And then in the Kansas City Museum was Annie Chambers' dressers in the Kansas City Museum you can go see. And then in the City Union Mission itself was a painting that Annie Chambers commissioned after she converted. And it's a painting of a rabid dog who is keeping back cattle. So there's a bunch of cattle that want to charge, and this dog is sort of keeping them at bay. And Annie Chambers gave it to David Buckley, saying, Buckley, you are here sort of keeping back sin and evil in Kansas City. So you are the dog fighting evil and fighting sin in Kansas City. And so that's the City Union Mission story. So but here, actually, so I have a picture. Here's Annie, obviously in her later years. So we can send that around. And then here is the interior. This is the entryway to the brothel. So again, to think about the ways in which these institutions were and were not regulated, that it was sort of wide open. That she had this sort of glorious, like her name emblazoned in tile.
Does anybody need a burst of sugar or that candy? All these hills you guys are going up are so impressed.
Oh, I love M&M's.
Our car's going. You guys are just going. Like it's no big deal.
Thank you very much.
Trick or treat.
But this is representative that by the 1870s and 1880s, cities had grown large enough that religious institutions, I'll grab one, had transformed themselves to not just being centers of worship, but centers for reform. So the earliest rescue mission like this was built in New York City in 1871, called the Water Street Mission. And then the second one was in Chicago, which is where I was from, called the Pacific Garden Mission, which actually some of you might know of because it runs a radio program called Unshackled, which you can catch at weird hours of the night, sort of conversion narratives of people who were sort of, drunkards or drug addicts or sort of quote-unquote fallen women who had gotten saved by wandering into these places. And they were intentionally, Quality Hill, the reason that church was there is because they relied upon the wealth of the neighbors to keep that church open. But institutions like this intentionally go to red light districts and survive on donations of various kinds. So, and the hope is that people will wander in. I mean, that was something you always hear in these conversion narratives. I wandered into the mission. And then that sort of happenstance becomes a sign of providence, right? Like I ended up here by divine providence, but it was also like they intentionally look like bars or brothels so that people stumble into them on accident and then see this like, oh, it must be God telling me something because I ended up here by accident. So
that's interesting.
Yeah. So the Pacific Garden Mission in Chicago was the Pacific Beer Garden. But when George Clark, who was the evangelical who took it over, just crossed out beer, wrote mission, but then it literally looked like a bar. So he would have drunkards stumbling in. He'd say, "Come have a seat," and then instead of serving him a drink, he'd start preaching to him and witnessing to him in various ways. So.
Everybody okay on water?
Thank you very much.